The stainless steel tray struck the tile hard enough to send clamps, gauze packets, and sealed syringes skittering beneath 3 occupied gurneys. Dr. Bradley Hayes did not look down at the mess he had created. He pointed instead at the temporary badge clipped to Heather Collins's navy scrubs. "Probationary nurse," he said. "That means you carry out the plan. It does not mean you invent one, because standing near a veteran makes you feel important." More than a dozen people heard him. 2 emergency physicians paused beside the central desk. 3 nurses watched from the medication station. A respiratory therapist held a mask halfway to a patient's face. Security Officer Paul Benson stopped at the corridor entrance. Even the veterans waiting behind the glass partition looked toward the trauma bay. Heather remained beside Sergeant Ryan Cooper's gurney, one hand resting on the side rail. The monitor above Ryan displayed a rhythm that had changed twice in less than a minute. Dr. Hayes had blamed movement. Heather had checked the lead placement, then Ryan's breathing, then the pale skin beneath his hospital gown. She had asked for a reassessment. Hayes had answered by sweeping the tray from her hands. "Step away from my patient," he ordered. Heather released the rail, but before retreating, she locked the gurney's left wheel, lowered the bright examination light, and shifted Ryan's oxygen line away from the hinge, where it had begun to pinch. 3 movements, precise, unhurried. Daniel Sullivan, a former Navy corpsman now working as an emergency technician, noticed the order in which she performed them. So did Dr. Fiona Blake. Charge nurse Ashley Morgan folded her arms. "Credentials exist for a reason." Daniel bent to retrieve a clamp. "So does judgment." Hayes glanced between them. "Judgment without authority is improvisation. Improvisation gets people hurt." Ryan's sister, Lily Cooper, stood against the wall with both hands pressed around her phone. She was the only one watching the monitor. Hayes turned on her with professional patience sharpened into contempt. "Your brother is being treated by the most qualified trauma team in this building, not by the newest person wearing scrubs." Heather said nothing. She stepped back exactly as ordered. Then Ryan's monitor changed again. This time, Fiona Blake moved first. "Hold on," she said. Hayes's attention snapped toward the screen. Heather had already reached for the emergency cart. Fiona examined Ryan, reviewed the monitor, and issued 2 short orders. Daniel repositioned the gurney. Chloe Mitchell, the junior nurse assigned to the bay, retrieved medication from the locked drawer. Within minutes, Ryan's breathing steadied. Hayes said the improvement confirmed his original assessment. Fiona did not agree, but she did not challenge him in front of the patient. Heather collected the instruments from the floor. She checked each sealed package for damage before returning it to the tray. The bent clamp went into a disposal bin. The contaminated gauze followed. Hayes watched her work. "You have been here less than 3 hours," he said. "You have interrupted a physician twice, unsettled a family member, and created confusion in an active trauma bay." "I asked for a reassessment," Heather replied. Her voice was level, lower than Lily expected. Hayes gave a thin smile. "And now you are revising history. That habit usually takes longer to develop." Ashley stepped closer to Heather. "Supply inventory, back corridor, until I decide where you can work without disrupting care." Chloe looked down at the chart in her hands. Daniel straightened from the floor. She caught the line before it occluded. Ashley's expression tightened. "You are an emergency technician, Mr. Sullivan, not a member of the credentialing committee." "I know what I saw. And I know the difference between helping and encouraging insubordination." Heather lifted the cleaned tray. Her left knee resisted when she turned, a momentary stiffness visible only in the slight pause before her next step. Daniel noticed that too. Hayes leaned close enough that only Heather Ashley and Daniel could hear him clearly. "You may have impressed people in some understaffed clinic where confidence passed for training," he said. "Here, we can tell the difference." Heather met his gaze. For an instant, Daniel expected a reply sharp enough to split the room. She gave none. She carried the tray toward the rear corridor. Lily called after her. "Thank you." Heather did not turn, but her grip tightened around the metal edge. Behind her, Hayes told Chloe to update the chart. He never asked what Heather had seen. The supply room was narrow, windowless, and colder than the rest of the department. Shelves of sealed equipment ran from floor to ceiling. Heather placed the tray on a counter, removed a printed inventory sheet, and began checking expiration dates. She worked from the door inward. Airway supplies first. Bleeding control packs second. Intravenous equipment third. Diagnostic kits last. She did not follow the sequence printed on Ashley's form. She followed proximity to the emergency exit. Daniel entered, carrying 2 boxes of saline. "You organize every room like someone might have to leave it in 30 seconds, he said. Heather marked a line on the sheet. "Things are easier to find when the order stays consistent." "That is not hospital order." "No." Daniel set down the boxes. "Navy?" Heather checked the lot number on a sealed package. He waited. She wrote the number into the margin. "You were?" 8 years. Corpsman. Mostly ships, then a shore assignment I was not smart enough to refuse. A corner of his mouth lifted. Heather did not reward the joke, though her eyes softened. Daniel nodded toward the trauma bay. Hayes was out of line. "He is responsible for the department." "That was not what I said." Heather placed a packet on the correct shelf. "Responsibility changes the cost of being wrong. It does not remove the possibility." Daniel studied her. Most new employees filled silence by explaining themselves. Heather seemed to treat silence as an instrument, useful when handled with care, dangerous when used to avoid necessary action. He pointed toward her knee. "Old injury?" "It works." "That was not what I asked either." Heather marked another item. Daniel let the question go. A burst of radio static sounded from the corridor. Security was testing the emergency network ahead of the storm expected to hit the naval base that afternoon. The crackle stopped Heather's pen. For less than a second, the supply room disappeared from her face. Red dust pressed against a dark horizon. A transport aircraft waited with its rear ramp lowered. Men shouted over the engine wash. A corpsman knelt beside a wounded operator while a working dog pulled against its harness, searching for the handler who had stopped answering. Heather's gloved hand held pressure against a field dressing. Someone demanded that she choose which casualty moved first. There had been room for 4. There had been 5 who could not wait. "Ma'am?" Daniel's voice brought back white shelves and fluorescent light. Heather looked down. The pen had left a dark mark across the inventory sheet. "You all right?" "Yes." The answer arrived too quickly. Daniel watched her cap the pen and replace the damaged form with a clean one. He had seen people return from memories they did not intend to visit. Some came back angry. Others came back confused. Heather returned, organized. That unsettled him more. When authority and evidence point in different directions, which deserves the first loyalty? A title can protect standards, but silence can also protect the person misusing them. Heather chose not to defend herself while a patient remained stable. Was that discipline, or had she already learned that speaking too soon only gave powerful people another reason not to listen? By early afternoon, the story of the fallen tray had reached every workstation in the emergency department. Ashley never repeated Hayes's exact words. She did not need to. She described Heather as a transfer who had trouble understanding scope, then allowed others to improve the accusation through speculation. One nurse heard Heather had been dismissed from a civilian trauma center. A clerk claimed there was a gap in her resume. A laboratory technician said her references had taken longer than usual to confirm. Carter Brooks, the hospital operations administrator, corrected none of them. He had approved Heather's temporary placement after receiving basic license verification, an employment history, and a federal personnel notice stating that portions of her previous service could not be released through routine channels. The notice had irritated him. Restricted records created work. Work created signatures. Signatures created responsibility. When Ashley entered his office with a written concern, Carter read the first page twice. She challenged Dr. Hayes during her first shift. She questioned him in front of a patient's family. Was the patient harmed? Ashley's mouth tightened. That is not the standard. No, it is the first question legal will ask. She also handled equipment outside the sequence assigned by the bay nurse. Did she use it? She prepared it. Carter placed the report on his desk. Preparation is difficult to discipline. Ashley leaned toward him. Bradley believes she is testing boundaries. Bradley believes every unfamiliar person is testing boundaries. You say that because he cannot hear you. I say it because he has filed 6 complaints this quarter and 4 concerned people who disagreed with him. Ashley studied Carter's face. Are you defending her? I am defending the hospital from poorly documented decisions. That was the position Carter preferred. It sounded neutral, even when it protected him. Ashley tapped the report. Then verify her full record. Carter glanced at the federal notice beneath Heather's onboarding file. I have requested clarification. When? This morning. Ashley knew that meant he had sent an email to a general personnel address. Until then? Carter slid the complaint back toward her. Keep her away from critical cases. Heather spent the next 2 hours restocking carts and transporting stable patients. The assignment was meant to reduce her visibility. Instead, it gave her access to nearly every corner of the department. She found a pediatric airway kit stored in an adult cabinet and moved it only after getting Chloe to witness the correction. She noticed that one emergency cart had a wheel lock that failed under pressure and placed it out of service before Mason Reed leaned his full weight against it. She caught a mislabeled drawer without opening any sealed medication. Each time, she documented what she had found. Each time, Ashley answered with a new criticism. You are not here to inspect us. The cart would not hold position, Heather said. We have maintenance personnel. I notified them. You also put the cart out of service. It moved while locked. Ashley's smile held no warmth. You have an answer for everything, except why your employment file reads like someone removed several years with a knife. Chloe stood nearby, pretending to review supplies. Heather signed the maintenance tag. My license is current. That was not my question. It is the relevant answer. Ashley's expression hardened. You do not decide what is relevant in my department. Heather attached the tag to the cart handle. No, she said, but the failed lock does. Mason lowered his head to hide a reaction. Ashley saw it. Mason, ambulance bay. Chloe, medication audit. Ms. Collins, linen storage. When they separated, Mason caught up with Heather beside the service elevator. You made her angry. Heather pressed the elevator button. She was already angry. She thinks you are trying to embarrass her. I reported a broken cart. That does not mean she is wrong about the result. Heather looked at him then. Mason was 24, earnest, and still young enough to believe good intentions should produce predictable outcomes. "You cannot control every interpretation," she said. "You can control whether the next patient is placed on faulty equipment." The elevator opened. Mason followed her inside. "Daniel says you move like military." "Daniel notices too much." "That sounds like confirmation." "It sounds like an observation about Daniel." Mason grinned. "For sure." Heather turned her attention to the floor display. When the doors opened again, the smile left Mason's face. A veteran in the corridor had begun shouting at an orderly. The man wore a weathered flight jacket over his hospital clothes. His hands shook. He had mistaken the closing elevator doors for something else and backed himself against the wall. Security approached from both ends of the corridor. Heather stepped out before Mason could stop her. She did not touch the veteran. She positioned herself at an angle that left his exit visible. "Sir," she said, "blue wall, white floor, 2 elevators behind me." The veteran's eyes moved toward her. "Your right hand is against a hospital rail," she continued. "The doors are open. No one is closing them." Security Officer Paul Benson slowed. Heather kept her hands where the veteran could see them. "Count the lights above us." The man's breathing remained ragged, but his gaze lifted. "1, he said. Heather waited. 2. Mason watched her measure the distance between them without looking down. She had placed herself outside reach while appearing close enough to help. 3, the veteran said. By the 5th light, his shoulders had lowered. By the 7th, he recognized the orderly. Paul Benson signaled the second guard to remain back. Heather asked the veteran whether he wanted a chair or the elevator. He chose the chair. She let the orderly bring it. When the corridor cleared, Dr. Ethan Walker stood beside the nurse's station holding a tablet. He had observed the last minute of the exchange. "You are assigned to linen storage," he said. The corridor was blocked. Security was present. They adjusted. Ethan looked toward Paul. At her direction? Paul chose his words carefully. Her approach was working. Ethan faced Heather again. "You have a pattern. You act, then explain why the action should be exempt from review." "I documented the cart." "I am not discussing the cart. The veteran is safe. That is an outcome. It is not authorization." Heather's gaze remained steady. "Would you prefer a different outcome?" The question was not hostile. That made Ethan more defensive. "I would prefer staff who understand that success does not create permission retroactively." Daniel had come within hearing distance. "And failure does not become acceptable because the right person authorized it." Ethan turned. "Were you invited into this conversation?" "No." "Then resist the habit of inserting yourself." Daniel nodded toward Heather. "That habit seems selective around here." Ethan's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, an overhead call summoned him to Ryan Cooper's bay. Heather's attention shifted at once. Ethan noticed. "You are not assigned to Sergeant Cooper." She stepped aside. He walked past her. Daniel waited until Ethan entered the bay. "You keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Backing down right before they have to decide whether you are correct." Heather watched through the glass as Ryan's monitor alarmed. "Not every fight improves the patient's chances." "No, but avoiding every fight can lower them." Her eyes stayed on Ryan. Inside the bay, Chloe adjusted the monitor leads. Ethan checked the chart. Hayes entered, followed by Fiona Blake. Ryan tried to sit upright, then gripped the side rail. Lily Cooper rose from her chair. Heather saw the change in Ryan's face before the alarm sounded again. She took one step toward the bay. Ashley blocked her path. "Do not." "He is compensating. You are observing through glass." His breathing changed. Dr. Walker is with him. Heather looked beyond Ashley. Ethan was reading the most recent notes. Hayes spoke to Lily without examining the line beneath Ryan's blanket. Fiona moved to the opposite side of the gurney and asked for new readings.
Ashley lowered her voice.
You have already made yourself the subject of this shift. Do not turn him into your justification. Heather's expression altered. Not anger, something denser. He is not an argument, she said. Inside the bay, Fiona called for assistance. Heather reached for the door. Ashley caught her wrist. Daniel saw the motion from the central station. Heather looked down at Ashley's hand. Ashley released her. Stay out of the way.
Heather entered behind Chloe,
but did not approach the head of the bed. She checked the equipment connection near Ryan's left side, traced the line to the pump, and found resistance where the tubing disappeared beneath a blanket fold. She repositioned the blanket and called Ethan's name. He looked over. She pointed. Ethan checked the line, then ordered the pump stopped while Fiona reassessed Ryan. Hayes stared at Heather. Who authorized you to enter? Fiona answered without looking away from the patient. I did now. You did not call her. I am calling her useful. Within minutes, the immediate danger passed. Lily stood beside the wall, shaking with restrained anger. What would have happened if she stayed outside? Hayes removed his gloves. The issue was identified. By her? By the team. You told her to stay away from him. I assigned qualified personnel to your brother. Heather moved toward the door. Lily stepped into her path. Please tell me what you saw. Hayes spoke before Heather could answer. Medical explanations come from physicians. Fiona removed her gloves and dropped them into the disposal bin. She saw a pattern that needed checking, Fiona said. She was correct to call attention to it. Hayes turned toward her. Careful. Fiona met his stare. About accuracy? About encouraging staff to exceed their role. Ethan looked from Hayes to Heather. He had challenged her in the corridor minutes earlier. He still believed in the principle he had defended. Yet, he had also watched her identify the problem while 3 credentialed clinicians focused elsewhere. Dr. Hayes, Ethan said, the line was obscured. I can see that. She noticed it before I did. Hayes's face remained controlled, but his voice sharpened. Then improve your assessment. Do not transfer your responsibility to a nurse who has been here half a shift. Ethan absorbed the rebuke. Heather left without claiming credit. That choice disturbed Hayes more than an argument would have. He could defeat open defiance. Silence left him without a clear target. By mid-afternoon, the storm had darkened the emergency department windows. Wind pushed rain against the glass in hard sheets. Base security restricted movement through the east gate, and ambulances were directed toward the covered naval hospital entrance. Heather returned to the supply room. Her hands remained steady until she reached for a roll of medical tape. The tearing sound pulled her backward. Velcro separating from fabric. A blue-gray armband wrapped around her sleeve. A dim aircraft cabin. A working dog pressed against her leg while the floor vibrated beneath them. A corpsman across from her held up 4 fingers, then pointed toward 5 casualties secured along the bulkhead. His mouth formed a question she could not hear over the engines. Heather had answered by unfastening her own restraint and moving toward the patient closest to the ramp. The next impact threw everyone sideways. The memory ended before the decision did. Heather placed the tape on the shelf. Her left hand had curled into a fist. She opened it 1 finger at a time. Chloe entered, carrying replacement gloves. I knocked, she said. Heather nodded. Chloe placed the boxes on the counter. Dr. Hayes is telling people You interfered with Sergeant Cooper's treatment. I entered when assistance was called. He says Dr. Blake only authorized you afterward. That is true. Chloe waited for outrage. Heather aligned the boxes by size. You could file a response. Yes. Will you? I will document what occurred. That is not the same thing. It is the part I can prove.
Chloe stepped farther into the room.
I reported a dosing concern 3 months ago. It involved a different attending physician, but Dr. Hayes chaired the review. Heather stopped arranging the gloves. The order was corrected before the medication reached the patient, Chloe continued. The report became a discussion about my tone. After that, people stopped asking me to assist with complex cases. Was the concern valid? Yes. Did the review say that? In one sentence. Page 4.
Heather looked at her.
Keep a copy? I did. Good. Chloe laughed once, without humor. That is all? What do you want me to tell you? That it gets better. Heather considered the question. I do not know whether it gets better, she said, but records make denial harder. Chloe studied her face. You sound like someone who has been through an investigation. Heather returned to the gloves. Most nurses have. Not like that.
Before Heather could respond,
A small photograph slipped from the pocket of her folded jacket on the counter. It landed face up. Chloe bent before Heather reached it. The picture had faded at the edges. It showed a group standing beside a transport aircraft. Most wore flight helmets or protective eyewear. A Belgian Malinois sat in front, alert and square-shouldered. Heather stood at the edge of the group, younger, her hair pulled back beneath a dark cap.
a strip of blue-grey fabric
Crossed one sleeve. The photograph had been torn through the middle and taped from behind. The person beside Heather was missing from the surviving half. Chloe looked closer. A handwritten word marked the lower border. Northstar. Heather took the photograph from her. Was that your unit? It was a team. You had a working dog? He belonged to a handler. What was his name? Heather slid the photograph into her jacket. Chloe expected another refusal. Ash, Heather said. The name changed her face more than any question about the military had. For one breath, grief and affection occupied the same space. Then both were contained. Chloe glanced at the strip on Heather's sleeve. What was the armband? Heather folded the jacket over the photograph. Something people needed to see from a distance. Ashley appeared in the doorway. What are you two discussing? Glove inventory, Heather said.
Ashley's gaze moved between them.
That subject appears emotionally demanding. Chloe straightened. We finished, then returned to the main floor. When Chloe passed, Ashley remained in the doorway. I spoke with operations, she said. Your employment record contains nearly 5 years with no public assignment. Heather lifted the next box. My license was verified. You repeat that whenever anyone asks where you learn to act as though rank is optional. Rank is not optional.
Then why do you keep stepping around it?
Heather's eyes moved to Ashley's name badge, then back to her face. Because rank and responsibility are not always standing in the same place. Ashley's cheeks reddened. That sounds polished. Did you practice it while deciding what parts of your past to hide? My required disclosures are complete. Carter Brooks disagrees. Then Mr. Brooks can speak with me. He intends to.
Ashley stepped closer.
I have worked in this department for 14 years. I know the type who arrives with a carefully edited resume and an attitude built on things no one else can verify. Heather's voice stayed low. What type is that? Someone who expects mystery to be mistaken for importance. Heather held her gaze. You do not have to mistake it for anything. Ashley's lips pressed into a narrow line. When this review is finished, you may find yourself counting gloves somewhere much farther from patience. She left before Heather could answer. The threat followed her into the corridor. Heather continued the inventory. Outside, the storm warning advanced from advisory to emergency status. Commander Charlotte Parker arrived at the hospital shortly before 4 p.m., wearing a rain-darkened Navy uniform beneath an open coat. She crossed the emergency department with the measured pace of someone who expected the room to settle without being told. It did. Charlotte had commanded the medical center for 11 months. She knew Hayes's reputation for excellence under pressure and arrogance after it. She also knew complaints about arrogance rarely survived contact with outcome statistics. Carter Brooks met her beside the central station. We may need to restrict intake if the east entrance floods, he said. Facilities? Working on drainage. Backup power? Tested this morning. Staffing? Thin, but manageable. Charlotte scanned the department. Her attention stopped on Heather, who was helping Mason secure loose equipment near the ambulance entrance. New nurse? Carter lowered his voice. Temporary trauma placement. There is already a scope concern. On her first day? Hayes believes she interfered with care. Was anyone harmed? No. Was anyone helped? Carter hesitated. Charlotte looked at him. That pause is an answer. There are conflicting accounts. Then collect them before deciding which one protects the least troublesome version. Carter disliked the phrasing because it described his method too accurately. Charlotte removed her coat. What is the credential issue? Her civilian license is active. Employment references are adequate. Prior federal service includes a restricted interval. Restricted by whom? The personnel notice does not specify. Did you call the listed verification office? I sent a request. When? This morning. Charlotte's eyes hardened. Call. The storm may have reduced staffing. Then discover that through conversation rather than assumption. Carter nodded. Across the department, Heather lifted a damaged equipment case from the floor. The movement strained her knee. She shifted her weight, hid the reaction, and continued. Charlotte watched the adjustment. Has she requested accommodation? Not that I know of. Has anyone asked? Carter looked toward Ashley. No. Charlotte turned back to him. Then we have a conduct dispute, an incomplete verification, and a supervisor who assigned physical work without reviewing a visible limitation. That makes it sound worse than it is. It sounds unfinished. Finish it. Dr. Hayes entered from Ryan Cooper's bay. Commander Parker, I need authority to remove Collins from clinical duty pending review. Charlotte regarded him. You are requesting removal after one shift? I am requesting containment before confidence becomes negligence. Heather heard the last word from across the station. She did not look over. Hayes continued. She challenges decisions publicly, enters treatment spaces without direction, and uses successful accidents to build credibility. Fiona Blake stepped out of the bay behind him. The line issue was not an accident. Hayes turned. I was speaking to the commander. Charlotte shifted her attention to Fiona. You are now speaking to both of us. Fiona approached. Heather Collins identified a developing problem twice. Her conduct requires review. So does the response to her warnings. Her conduct created disorder, Hayes said. Fiona's tone remained clinical. Your refusal to hear her created delay. Ashley joined them. With respect, Dr. Blake, allowing a probationary nurse to bypass structure teaches every junior employee that confidence is equivalent to authority. Daniel spoke from the workstation. Nobody followed her because she sounded confident. We checked because the patient changed. Ashley turned toward him. This is a command discussion. Charlotte raised one hand. The department settled again. She looked at Heather. Miss Collins, come here.
Heather crossed the floor.
Her posture changed as she approached. Not dramatically. Her shoulders aligned, her steps shortened, and her hands rested at her sides rather than in her pockets. Charlotte noticed the instinctive adjustment. So did Daniel. Describe the first incident, Charlotte said. Heather did so in fewer than 70 words. She omitted Hayes's insult. She did not mention the tray. She described Ryan's monitor change, her request, the order to step away, and Fiona's reassessment. Charlotte asked about the second incident. Heather explained the obscured line. Again, no accusation, no defense of character, only sequence. Hayes's frustration grew with every neutral sentence. You are presenting yourself as a passive observer, he said. That is an elegant distortion. Heather looked at him. He stepped closer.
You entered because you wanted to be right.
You have spent the entire day placing yourself near every disruption in this department, waiting for someone to mistake opportunism for instinct. Mason lowered his eyes. Chloe did not. Hayes pointed toward the temporary badge on Heather's chest. That badge says, New Hire. It does not say Rescuer. It does not say Commander. It does not say Exception. The last word held a contempt he had not intended to reveal. Heather's expression did not change. Charlotte's did. Dr. Hayes, she said, personal interpretation is not evidence. Heather Collins has made herself personal since the moment she arrived. No, Fiona replied. You did that when you knocked a tray from her hands. Charlotte turned toward Hayes. You omitted that. The tray was in the way. Daniel gave a short breath that was not quite a laugh. Hayes heard it. You find this entertaining, Mr. Sullivan? No, sir.
Then control your face.
Charlotte's voice lowered. Enough. The word altered the air more effectively than shouting. Hayes stepped back. Charlotte addressed Heather. Until credential verification is complete, you will remain within your documented nursing scope. Any emergency deviation will be reported immediately. You will not be removed from duty based on conflicting verbal accounts. Ashley began to object. Charlotte stopped her with a glance. This protects the patient and the review, Charlotte said. Not anyone's pride. Hayes looked at Heather as though she had won something. Heather knew better. She had been permitted to remain in a building where half the department now believed she had escaped discipline through mystery. The decision increased scrutiny rather than reducing it. She returned to work. Hayes waited until Charlotte moved away. Then he spoke near Heather's shoulder. You survived the first complaint, he said. Do not confuse that with belonging here. Heather secured a loose equipment strap. I do not. The absence of fear in her answer struck him as insolence. He walked away with his authority intact and his control diminished. The storm reached the base at 4:20 p.m. Rainwater spread across the ambulance approach. Facilities crews placed barriers around the east drainage channel. Security redirected civilian traffic away from the naval gate. Inside, the department tightened around the possibility of isolation. Mason checked backup oxygen cylinders. Daniel tested portable monitors. Chloe reviewed emergency medication seals with Fiona. Ashley reassigned 2 nurses from observation to trauma intake. Heather studied the department map posted beside the central desk. She traced the ambulance entrance, the internal service corridor, and the loading route connected to the base clinic. Ethan Walker noticed. Planning another inspection? Learning the exits. There are illuminated signs. Signs identify doors. They do not identify which routes remain useful when one entrance fails. Ethan folded his arms. You speak as though you expect the building to fail. Heather examined the lower corridor. Buildings fail in pieces. He followed her gaze despite himself. The service hall passes oxygen storage, she said. If the east door floods, moving patients through there will narrow access. That corridor is an evacuation route. It is also where facilities staged pumps this morning. Ethan glanced toward the hallway. 2 large water removal units occupied half its width. His expression changed. He called facilities and ordered them moved. Heather stepped away. Ethan ended the call. You could have reported that to Ashley. I reported it to the person standing closest. You always have a justification. You moved the pumps. That does not make your method correct.
No.
Ethan waited for more. Heather checked the stack of evacuation tags. He looked at her with open irritation. You agree? Results do not erase procedure. It was his own argument returned, without mockery. That unsettled him more than contradiction. Then why keep violating it? Heather placed the tags in a visible holder. Because procedure is a route, not a wall. Ethan's response was interrupted by a radio call from the ambulance bay. A transport vehicle had lost control near the west gate. Initial report: multiple injured service members. A second call followed before the first ended. The base clinic had suffered a partial power failure. Patients were being redirected to the Naval Hospital. Ashley moved to the central desk. How many incoming? The dispatcher's voice broke under static. Estimate 8, possible 12. 2 non-ambulatory. Additional clinic transfers pending. The emergency department changed shape. Conversations stopped. Chairs moved. Curtains opened. Equipment rolled toward marked positions. Hayes took the center aisle. Clear bays 1 through 4. Fiona, airway team. Ethan, primary triage. Ashley, call surgical backup. Existing stable patients moved to observation. Heather watched staff divide according to the plan. Then she looked toward the service corridor. The facility's pumps had not yet been moved. Water had begun sliding beneath the east door. A maintenance worker pushed one machine sideways, blocking more of the passage. Heather crossed to Ashley. The east route is narrowing. Facilities is handling it. Clinic transfers will enter through the service bay if the ambulance lane closes. Ashley pointed toward observation. Move stable patients. Heather held her gaze. The corridor needs clearing first. You have your assignment. Daniel heard the exchange. He looked toward the service hall and saw the obstruction. I can move the pumps, he said. Ashley turned on him. You will prepare intake stations. It takes 2 minutes. It takes 1 accident to lose the corridor. Heather reached for the nearest pump handle. Hayes's voice carried across the department. Collins, leave facilities equipment alone. The route is restricted. It is not your decision. A deep mechanical alarm sounded from the ceiling. The ventilation indicators above the east treatment zone shifted from green to amber. Carter Brooks emerged from the administrative corridor with a phone against his ear. We lost 1 air handling unit, he announced. Facilities says it may be a sensor fault. Heather looked toward the isolation rooms. Are negative pressure rooms stable? She asked. Hayes stared at her. You are not directing this response. Carter covered the phone. They are checking. A paramedic radioed from outside. The Westgate casualties were 4 minutes away. The first clinic transfer had already entered the covered service bay. Hayes issued new assignments. Keep the east zone open. We cannot surrender 4 bays over an unconfirmed ventilation error. Fiona looked at the amber indicator. If the pressure is unstable, we need verification before placing respiratory patients there. The system has redundancy. Carter nodded too quickly. It should. Heather moved toward the wall display and read the pressure values.
One number shifted,
Corrected, then shifted again. She looked at the closed isolation room door. Do not put the first respiratory transfer in East 2. Hayes turned fully toward her. His face held no theatrical anger now. The pressure of the approaching casualties had stripped him down to conviction and pride. You have been instructed 3 times to remain within assignment. The room is not holding. You are reading a panel you are not trained to service. I am reading a pattern.
You are reading yourself into command.
Fiona stepped closer to the display. Bradley, she may be right. Then maintenance will confirm it. The patient arrives before maintenance. Hayes pointed toward the West trauma bays. East 2 remains active. We need capacity. Heather looked at Charlotte Parker. The commander was on another line, requesting base medical support. She had not heard the full exchange. Ashley moved to block Heather from the panel. You heard him?
Heather lowered her voice.
If they bring a compromised respiratory patient into that room, the failure will affect more than one bay. Ashley's confidence faltered, only briefly. Then document your concern. Heather looked toward the service entrance as wheels struck the threshold. The first transferred patient arrived under emergency covering, accompanied by a clinic nurse squeezing a ventilation bag. Behind them, a second gurney entered.
Radio traffic
Announced the Westgate casualties less than 2 minutes away. Hayes raised his voice. East 2, move. The clinic team turned the first gurney toward the amber-marked zone. Heather stepped into the path. Every person near the central aisle saw her. Hayes's expression became almost relieved. At last, she had given him an act he could name. Stand aside, he said. The room is unstable. You have no authority to stop this transfer.
The pressure differential is failing.
You are a probationary nurse reading numbers from a wall. Daniels stared at the panel. The fluctuating values pulled at a memory from shipboard casualty drills. He looked at Heather's position, then at the equipment she had ordered earlier, then at the service route she had mapped before the first alarm. Pieces aligned without forming a complete picture. Dr. Hayes, Daniel said, check the secondary indicator.
Hayes did not look away from Heather.
Mr. Sullivan, return to intake. The clinic nurse continued ventilating the patient by hand. I need a room. Heather moved to the gurney's side. West 3 has clean airflow and portable support. Ethan answered from triage. West 3 is reserved for the collision casualties. One of them is ambulatory. The report may be wrong, and this patient cannot wait. Ethan looked toward Hayes. Hayes spoke through clenched restraint. East 2, now. Heather did not move. Charlotte ended her call and turned. What is happening? Hayes answered first. Ms. Collins is refusing a direct order and obstructing an emergency transfer. Heather pointed to the panel. The room is losing pressure stability. Carter checked his phone. Facility still believes it may be a sensor fault. Maybe, Fiona repeated. Charlotte examined the values. Who verified the secondary reading? No one answered. The first Westgate ambulance sounded outside. The ventilation alarm changed from amber to red. Air seals engaged along the east corridor with a heavy mechanical thud. The isolation room doors locked automatically. The gurney remained outside. For half a second, nobody moved. Then the overhead system announced a containment fault. Heather took the clinic nurse's place at the head of the gurney long enough to redirect its movement. West 3, she said. This time, Ethan did not look at Hayes. He cleared the route himself. Staff moved. Fiona took control of the patient. Daniel opened the bay. Chloe transferred equipment. Mason pushed a second portable unit toward the entrance. Hayes stood in the center aisle while the department flowed around him. The red indicator reflected across his glasses. Heather had been right. Again. Carter Brooks looked down at his phone. A new email had arrived from Federal Personnel Verification.
The subject line contained Heather's full name
And a red restriction banner. He opened it. Most of the page displayed blocked text. One line remained visible. Special access confirmation required. Refer request to Naval Personnel Command. Below it sat a secondary reference. Northstar Medical Element. Carter read the words twice. Daniel glanced over his shoulder and stopped breathing for a beat. Northstar, he said. Heather heard him from across the department. Her hand tightened around the gurney rail. Charlotte Parker looked from Daniel to Heather. You recognize that designation? Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the restricted page. Not from records, he said. From people who were told never to ask what it meant. The first collision casualty entered through the ambulance doors, then the second. A third radio call announced more patients than the department had open bays. Hayes recovered his voice.
All incoming trauma remains under my command.
Heather looked toward the blocked east wing, the flooded service route, and the teams already dividing around inadequate space. The overhead ventilation warning continued. Carter's computer chimed with an incoming secure call request. He accepted it on speaker before Charlotte could stop him. A man's voice emerged through heavy encryption. This is Naval Personnel Command. Who initiated a verification request for Northstar?
No one answered immediately.
The caller continued. And why is Heather Collins inside an active medical emergency? Every head near the central desk turned toward her. Heather closed her eyes once. When she opened them, the first mass casualty alarm began.
A successful intervention
Can prove competence without settling whether the person had the right to act. At this point, should the hospital protect the chain of command until Heather's sealed record is verified? Or should the staff trust the judgment she has already demonstrated while patients continue arriving? The answer would have to wait.
Another gurney
Crossed the threshold, and Dr. Hayes issued an order that would place every remaining casualty into the only section Heather believed could no longer support them. Part 2. Heather saw the order reach the team before anyone questioned it. Two nurses began rolling the remaining collision casualties toward the west corridor. Mason pulled an empty gurney out of observation. Ethan called for portable monitors. Ashley directed a respiratory technician toward the same narrow treatment section that was already absorbing the clinic transfer. The west side could hold the first wave. It could not hold everyone. The locked doors along the east wing continued flashing red. Convert observation, Heather said.
Hayes turned toward her.
No. Move the ambulatory patients to the family waiting area. Put security at both entrances. Use observation for monitored trauma. That area is not configured for trauma. It has oxygen access, power, and clear movement on both sides. It also contains patients who have not been discharged. They can remain under nursing supervision in the waiting area. Hayes stepped closer. The alarm light painted a red edge across his face. You collect emergencies the way some people collect medals, he said. Every failure becomes another excuse to place yourself at the center. Heather looked past him toward the ambulance entrance. A paramedic pushed in a service member whose skin had turned gray beneath the fluorescent lights. Behind him, Another casualty tried to walk with help from two sailors. "We need the space," Heather said. "We need discipline." "We need both." Hayes pointed toward the central desk. "Stand there and document. That is an order you might be capable of following without redesigning the building." Charlotte Parker moved between them. "Dr. Hayes, give me your capacity plan." He answered immediately. "West trauma absorbs critical casualties. Observation remains operational. Lower priority transfers hold in the corridor until east ventilation clears." Charlotte glanced toward the corridor. 3 gurneys already occupied it. Portable equipment narrowed the remaining passage. One of the clinic patients required continuous respiratory support. A medic stood sideways because there was no room to pass. "How long until east clears?" Charlotte asked Carter. Carter listened to the phone, pressed against his ear. "Facilities cannot give an estimate." Charlotte turned to Heather. "Your plan." "Move stable observation patients to the family area with 2 nurses and security. Convert observation to monitored intake. Keep 1 lane open from the service entrance to imaging. Separate walking casualties before they enter the main floor." Hayes gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "A complete command structure in 20 seconds. How convenient." Charlotte ignored him. "Staff required?" 4 nurses, 2 technicians, 1 physician rotating between observation and West trauma. We do not have 4 available nurses. Chloe can lead 2. Ashley can cover central medication control. Daniel and Mason can move equipment. Dr. Walker can screen the walking casualties before they enter. Ethan looked up from the first incoming chart. Heather had assigned him without asking. The assignment was also the best use of his current position. Hayes saw the hesitation on Ethan's face. "She does not assign physicians," he said. Charlotte's gaze remained on Ethan. "Can you do it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then do it." Hayes stiffened. "Commander Parker, you are transferring operational control to an unverified nurse during a mass casualty event." "I am using her assessment," Charlotte replied. "Operational authority remains mine." "That distinction will disappear the moment people start obeying her." Charlotte looked directly at him. "Then give them a better plan." Hayes opened his mouth. The ambulance doors parted again. The next casualty arrived without a completed field report. A paramedic spoke over the alarms, explaining that the Westgate collision had involved a military transport van, an escort vehicle, and a utility truck forced sideways by standing water. Several occupants had been headed toward a retirement ceremony at the working dog training facility. Heather caught only fragments. Transport van, working dog, retirement ceremony. The words pressed against a sealed place in her memory, but there was no time to open it. She moved to the arriving gurney, read the handwritten field card, and checked the patient's response to the paramedic's voice. "Observation 2, she said. "Daniel, clear the left path. Mason, bring the portable unit from Bay 4. Chloe, take the clinic nurse with you." They moved. Not because Heather raised her voice, because each instruction answered the problem directly in front of them. Hayes watched the practical center of the department shift away from him. "Stop," he ordered. Daniel paused with both hands on the gurney rail. Mason halted beside the portable equipment. Chloe looked toward Charlotte. Heather did not repeat herself. The hesitation cost only 2 seconds, but everyone felt it. Charlotte stepped into the central aisle. "Follow the assignments." Movement resumed. Hayes lowered his voice so the nearest staff could not pretend they had misunderstood. "When this ends, every person who participated in this unauthorized structure will explain why they abandoned established command." Ethan tightened the strap on his tablet. "With respect, sir, Commander Parker authorized it. She authorized temporary movement. Collins is turning it into authority. Heather heard him. She did not defend herself. Instead, she checked the walking casualty approaching the entrance and signaled Ethan to intercept him before he entered the congested trauma section. That silence made Hayes angrier than open resistance. He had spent years reading opposition by tone, posture, and ambition. Heather offered him no emotional handle. She did not challenge him for recognition. She did not gather witnesses to her mistreatment. She simply continued choosing the next necessary action. To Hayes, that restraint looked calculated. To Daniel, it looked trained. The first 10 minutes divided the department into two competing systems. Hayes controlled formal orders in the West trauma bays. Heather controlled flow. Fiona Blake moved between both, managing the most unstable patients and refusing to participate in the growing personal conflict. Ethan screened casualties at the entrance, redirecting those who could walk and identifying one sailor whose steady speech concealed a worsening condition. Chloe converted observation with a speed that surprised Ashley. Mason cleared a path to imaging. Daniel removed the facilities equipment from the service corridor despite a shouted objection from Carter. The department gained 4 usable treatment spaces. Then, the backup power flickered. Every monitor remained active, but the overhead lighting dimmed. A ventilation alarm restarted. The elevators locked at their current floors. Carter stared at his phone. The East utility panel took water. Charlotte asked, "Can we isolate it?" "Facilities is attempting that." Heather turned toward the department map. "If the East panel feeds the service bay doors, they may close." Carter frowned. "The doors are on emergency power." So were the isolation locks. He checked the facilities message and read the same line twice. The service doors may default closed during panel isolation. Mason was still in the corridor beyond them. So was one of the incoming teams. Heather crossed the floor. Hayes blocked her with one arm. "Where are you going?" "To clear the threshold." "Facilities is handling it." "They are handling the panel. They are not moving the gurneys." He kept his arm in place. "You do not get to be first through every door." Heather looked down at his sleeve, then back at him. "Move." The single word held no anger, but it carried enough command that Daniel turned from across the room. Hayes heard it too. His face hardened. "You have mistaken tolerance for permission." A metal latch slammed in the service corridor. Mason shouted that the inner door was descending. Heather stepped around Hayes. He caught her shoulder. Her reaction was immediate and controlled. She rotated free without striking him, placed one hand against his wrist, and redirected his grip away from her body. The movement lasted less than a second. Hayes stared at his empty hand. Heather was already moving. She reached the corridor as Mason and the clinic nurse struggled to pull a gurney clear of the closing door. Daniel arrived from the opposite side. Together, they moved the patient past the threshold before the safety mechanism locked the panel halfway down. No one was injured. The corridor became unusable. Heather braced one hand against the wall while her left knee absorbed the stop. Pain crossed her face before she contained it. Mason saw the reaction. "You hurt it." "It still works." Daniel heard the same answer she had given him in the supply room. This time, he understood what it concealed. Heather returned to the central floor with a slight change in her gait. Hayes stood where she had left him. "You put your hands on a physician," he said. "You grabbed her," Daniel replied. Hayes turned. "No one asked for your interpretation." "I watched it." "You have spent this entire shift watching for reasons to worship someone you do not know. Daniel's expression sharpened. I do not worship uniforms or mysteries. I recognize useful judgment. And that makes you easy to manipulate. Charlotte approached before Daniel could answer. What happened? Hayes spoke first. She used force to evade a direct order. Heather said, the door was closing on a patient transfer. After you ignored me, the patient cleared the threshold. Charlotte looked toward Mason.
He nodded.
The gurney would have been trapped between the door and the equipment. Hayes gave him a hard stare. Mason swallowed, but did not retract the statement. Charlotte addressed Heather. Did you injure Dr. Hayes? No. Did you strike him? No. Hayes's voice rose. That is not the standard. She broke physical contact through a trained maneuver. Heather said nothing. Charlotte looked at her left knee. Can you continue? Yes. Then return to flow control.
Hayes stepped towards Charlotte.
You are rewarding this. I am postponing a conduct review until the department is safe. You are letting results excuse behavior. No, Charlotte said. I am refusing to let your anger replace evidence. The words landed in front of more than 20 witnesses. Hayes stopped speaking. The department did not.
A second group of casualties arrived through the ambulance entrance.
One was Lieutenant Logan Carter, a military working dog handler whose right arm had been secured against his body after the collision. He remained conscious and argued with the paramedic pushing his gurney. The dog stays with Chief Anderson. The dog is outside the clinical area, the paramedic said. He is retiring tonight. You are not attending a ceremony tonight. That is not the point. A broad-shouldered man in wet civilian clothes followed behind them. His silver hair was cropped close, and an Old Navy tattoo disappeared beneath his sleeve. He held a working dog lead wrapped twice around one fist. The dog itself remained beyond the ambulance doors with security. Heather did not see him. She was helping Ethan reassess a sailor whose condition had worsened during transport. The sailor answered questions clearly, but his breathing had become shallow. Ethan focused on the absence of obvious external injury. Heather watched the delay between each response and the next breath. Recheck him, she said. I am checking him. Not the field notes, him. Ethan looked at her. Under other circumstances, he would have challenged the tone. He examined the sailor again. His expression changed. Fiona. Fiona crossed from the adjacent bay, reassessed the patient, and ordered an immediate move into the remaining critical care space. Ethan stepped back while the team worked. He looked at Heather. You saw the breathing pattern? She nodded. Why not say exactly what you suspected? Because you were the physician standing closest. That has not stopped you before. It should matter when there is time. He absorbed the distinction. Hayes heard it from several feet away and interpreted it differently. So now she decides when rank matters, he said. How generous. Ethan turned toward him. She directed the concern to me. She corrected you publicly. She prevented delay. She has made you dependent on her approval in less than an hour. Ethan's face flushed. Heather did not intervene in the argument. She looked toward the entrance instead. 2 more patients were arriving, and the walking casualty area had become congested. Daniel, she called. He came at once. Move intake behind the glass partition. Keep one line for reassessment. No one leaves until Ethan clears them. Daniel nodded. Hayes gave a sharp laugh. There it is again, a sentence spoken as if the room belongs to her. Charlotte had reached the limit of divided leadership. She looked at the red East Wing indicators, the blocked service corridor, the crowded West Bays, and the staff, waiting for two incompatible command systems to agree. Then she faced Hayes. "Dr. Hayes, you will remain lead physician for direct treatment." He straightened. Charlotte continued, "Heather Collins will coordinate department flow under my authority until the casualty intake ends." The air changed, not through applause or visible celebration, through movement. Daniel no longer checked Hayes's face before carrying out Heather's directions. Chloe stopped pausing when Heather reassigned equipment. Ethan gave her updated capacity without being asked. Mason placed the status board where she could reach it. Fiona requested space from her rather than from the central desk. Practical authority transferred in less than 10 seconds. Hayes remained the senior doctor. He was no longer the person everyone waited for. Heather looked at Charlotte. "I need accurate totals." Charlotte nodded. "You will have them." Heather moved to the board. "West trauma?" "3 critical, 1 space opening," Fiona answered. "Observation?" "4 monitored, capacity for 2 more," Chloe said. "Walking intake?" 6, 1 under reassessment, Ethan replied. "Imaging route?" "Open through the North Hall," Daniel said. "Available transport?" "1 internal team," Mason answered. Heather marked each figure. Her handwriting was compact and angled. She divided the board into zones, assigned priorities, and placed staff names beside functions rather than ranks. Hayes saw his own name written under direct treatment. Not command. Treatment. "You reduced me to a box on a board," he said. Heather capped the marker. "I placed you where your skill is most useful." The reply drew no laughter. It did something worse. Several people agreed. Hayes stepped close enough that only she could hear the next words. "You think competence makes you untouchable? I have seen people like you before. They enter a crisis, break rules others are expected to follow, and let gratitude erase the damage." Heather's eyes shifted toward him. For the first time, his accusations seemed to reach something beyond professional irritation. Hayes noticed. "A resident ignored an attending order in my department 9 years ago," he continued. "He believed instinct mattered more than supervision. The patient suffered for his confidence. Do not stand there pretending procedure is only a weapon used by lesser minds." Heather held his gaze. "I am not pretending that." "Then stop teaching them that success forgives disobedience." "It does not." The answer disrupted the argument he had prepared. Heather continued, "But authority does not forgive refusing to look." Hayes's mouth tightened. There was truth on both sides, and neither had time to claim all of it. A respiratory technician called for support from observation. Heather turned away. For the next 40 minutes, the department operated at the edge of failure without crossing it. Heather redirected clinic transfers to unused recovery spaces after confirming power and oxygen access. She prevented the imaging corridor from becoming a holding area. She sent Mason to retrieve battery units before the next power fluctuation rather than after it. She reassigned Daniel from transport to triage when Ethan needed someone who could distinguish military field shorthand from incomplete civilian notes. Her instructions remained short. "Clear the north turn. Keep that monitor with the patient. Do not separate the field card from the chart. Walking does not mean stable. Recheck before transfer." She never announced what she knew. She made knowledge visible through use. The department discovered her in fragments. Daniel recognized the way she arranged casualties by transportation need rather than arrival order. Ethan noticed she anticipated which diagnostic resources would become unavailable next. Fiona saw that Heather never placed herself at the head of a treatment team when a qualified physician was present. Chloe watched her count staff after every movement, as though missing personnel mattered as much as missing equipment. Mason noticed that Heather always positioned herself where she could see the entrance, the status board, and both active corridors. Ashley noticed all of it and resented the admiration forming around the new nurse. She approached Heather during a brief lull.
You have what you wanted.
Heather kept writing. What is that? Everyone looking at you. Heather checked the capacity total. They are looking at the board. Ashley lowered her voice. You could have told us you had emergency management experience. My employment file contains what I was required to disclose. That is an answer designed to end questions. It usually fails. Ashley's frustration sharpened. You allowed us to believe you were inexperienced.
I allowed you to read my badge.
That badge was incomplete. No, your assumptions were. Ashley recoiled, as if Heather had raised her voice. She had not. You enjoyed this, Ashley said. Every time Bradley dismissed you, you knew the reversal would make him look smaller. Heather's pen stopped. When she spoke, the words carried more weariness than anger. No one who has seen a department fail enjoys being proven right. Ashley searched her face for satisfaction and found none.
That made her own accusation feel smaller.
She walked away before she had to acknowledge it. When a crisis forces people to choose between formal authority and demonstrated ability, a successful outcome does not automatically settle the ethical question. Heather's judgment was protecting patients, but her history remained sealed, and some of her actions crossed ordinary boundaries. Should proof come before trust, or can waiting for proof become its own form of danger? The power stabilized near 5:30 p.m. The East Wing remained sealed, but facilities isolated the damaged section. No additional casualties were expected from the gate collision. The base clinic restored limited power and stopped transferring patients. For the first time since the alarm began, the status board showed more open spaces than incoming names. The change released tension unevenly. Some staff exhaled. Others discovered how tired they had become. Heather stepped away from the board and placed one hand against the desk. Her left knee had swollen beneath her scrubs. She shifted her weight before anyone could offer help. Fiona noticed anyway. Sit down. I am fine. That phrase has lost credibility. Heather looked toward observation. Chloe has it. Then sit. Heather lowered herself into a chair near the central desk. Fiona crouched enough to examine the knee without making a public event of it. Old surgical repair? Yes.
Military? Heather did not answer.
Fiona accepted the silence. You need imaging when this settles. It has been worse. That is not reassuring. Across the desk, Carter Brooks stared at the secure call window on his computer. The representative from Naval Personnel Command had remained on the line through most of the crisis, speaking privately with Charlotte after Carter's accidental use of the department's speakers. The visible portion of Heather's record had expanded by only a few lines. United States Navy Nurse Corps, Expeditionary Medical Assignment, Northstar Medical Element. Access restricted under Special Operations Support Protocols. The role field remained blocked. The final rank field remained blocked. Carter rubbed both hands over his face. He had spent the day treating the missing years as an administrative inconvenience. Now, every restricted line looked like an accusation. Charlotte ended the call and approached Heather. Naval Personnel Command has verified your prior service and your nursing credentials. Hayes stood nearby. That confirms she was a military nurse, he said. Nothing more. Charlotte looked at him. It confirms that the gap in her record was lawful and properly disclosed. It does not confirm command authority. No one has claimed she holds current command authority. She used the title through behavior.
Heather's eyes moved toward him.
I use no title. Hayes gestured toward the staff. You did not need to. You built the impression and let them supply the mythology. Daniel stepped forward. No one here knows enough to build mythology. Hayes turned on him. You said Northstar as if you recognized it. I recognize the name. From where? Daniel hesitated. Years earlier, during a shore assignment, a wounded special operator had arrived without unit markings. The transfer packet contained a single handwritten instruction. Northstar accepts responsibility at wheels up. Daniel had never learned whether Northstar referred to a team, a place, or a person. He told him that much. Hayes seized on the uncertainty. So a phrase from an old transfer note is now evidence of greatness? No, Daniel said. It is evidence that I do not know the full answer. Finally, something honest. Charlotte's expression cooled. Dr. Hayes, your insistence on separating evidence from assumption is legitimate. Your need to humiliate everyone who disagrees with you is not. He looked toward Heather. She has not been humiliated. She has been promoted by spectacle. Heather rose from the chair. The pain in her knee made the movement slower than she intended. Hayes watched and smiled without kindness. There, he said, even the injury arrives at the correct moment. Daniel moved before Heather could respond. Fiona caught his arm. Heather faced Hayes herself. You believe I planned this? I believe you learned long ago that restraint makes other people tell your story for you. The accusation struck closer than he understood. Heather's hand moved toward the pocket where she had kept the torn photograph. She stopped before touching it. I learned, she said, that telling the story does not change who failed to come home. The department heard her. It was the longest personal statement she had made all day. Hayes's expression shifted, but pride prevented him from stepping back. Before he could answer, a dog barked once beyond the ambulance doors. Heather's head turned. The reaction was too fast to conceal. Daniel saw it. Chloe saw it. The outer doors opened. Security Officer Paul Benson entered first, walking backward with one hand raised to clear space. Lieutenant Logan Carter followed on foot now, his injured arm secured against his chest. He had refused continued treatment until he knew the dog from the collision was safe. Rain covered the shoulders of his working uniform. Beside him walked a Belgian Malinois. Ash's nails struck the polished floor in a measured rhythm. A dark ceremonial harness crossed his chest. Attached to one side was a clear, weatherproof pouch containing a folded strip of blue-gray fabric. Behind them came retired Chief Petty Officer Jack Anderson. He carried no lead. He did not need one. Ash moved at Logan's knee until he crossed the threshold of the emergency department. Then the dog stopped. His ears lifted. His head turned past the nurses, past the physicians, past the equipment and unfamiliar smells. Directly toward Heather. Logan tightened his grip on the lead. Ash! The dog did not pull. He stood fixed, reading the room through scent and sound. Heather's face lost every layer of professional distance she had maintained since morning. Jack Anderson followed the dog's gaze. He saw Heather beside the central desk. The years between them seemed to strike him all at once. His shoulders lowered. Holy cow, Mason whispered. Heather did not move. Ash took one step. Logan looked from the dog to Heather. Ma'am, do you know him? Heather's answer barely carried. Yes. Logan loosened the lead. Ash crossed the emergency department. He ignored the patients, the staff, and the food tray left near the waiting area. He stopped 2 feet in front of Heather and looked up. No one spoke. Heather raised her right hand, palm angled inward, 2 fingers lowered. The signal was small enough that most people nearly missed it. Ash stepped to her left side, turned outward, and sat with his body aligned against her injured knee. A trained, protective position. Heather's hand rested on the dog's head. Her fingers trembled once. "Ash," she said. The dog leaned into her leg. Jack Anderson reached them more slowly. Anger, relief, and old grief fought across his face. "You disappeared," he said. Heather looked at him. "I know. You left no forwarding address, no calls, no answer through the association." "I know."
He glanced at Ash.
"He kept checking every dark-haired woman who used your hand signal." Heather lowered her eyes. Jack reached toward the clear pouch on Ash's harness. The latch opened with a soft click. Velcro separated from folded fabric. The sound pulled Heather into the transport aircraft again. Red emergency lighting. Ash braced between the casualty litters while the aircraft rolled. Chief Caleb Price held one hand against a failing restraint and the other over a corpsman's shoulder. The crew chief shouted that the weight limit would not change. 5 patients, 4 spaces that could support them. Caleb looked at Heather and understood before she spoke. "No," she told him. He fastened the blue-gray command armband tighter around her sleeve. "You choose the ones who still have a choice. I am not leaving you. That is an order you do not get to give." The aircraft shuddered. Caleb transferred his place to the youngest casualty. Heather ordered the ramp closed, while Ash's handler dragged the dog aboard. Caleb remained beside the ground team, one hand raised through the dust. The mission report later called the decision necessary. Heather had never found that word useful. The memory released her. Jack unfolded the armband. A white name strip read Collins. A silver oak leaf device caught the fluorescent light. Beneath it, the Northstar emblem remained faded but visible. Hayes stared at the device. He knew military rank well enough to recognize it. So did Charlotte Parker. Her posture changed. The ambulance doors opened again. Rear Admiral Grace Bennett entered in service dress blue, accompanied by Special Agent Amber Davis and 2 members of Regional Medical Command. Grace had been scheduled to preside over Ash's retirement ceremony before the storm redirected her to base emergency operations. The collision report had brought her to the hospital. The secure verification request had changed the purpose of her arrival. Conversations stopped across the department. Staff moved out of the central aisle without being told. Grace walked toward Heather, her eyes moving first to the armband, then to Ash, then to Jack Anderson. She stopped at formal distance.
"Commander Collins."
The title crossed the room without volume. Heather's hand remained on Ash's head. "Admiral." Charlotte stood straighter. Logan's expression changed from confusion to recognition. Daniel looked at the status board, then at Heather, fitting every unexplained habit into a shape he had not allowed himself to imagine. Ashley pressed both hands against the medication counter. Ethan removed his glasses and cleaned lenses that were not dirty. Carter stared at the restricted personnel screen as though it had personally betrayed him. Hayes did not move. Grace addressed the room. Commander Heather Collins served in the United States Navy Nurse Corps. She led the Northstar Expeditionary Medical Element assigned to support naval special warfare casualty operations. No one interrupted. "She was not a SEAL operator," Grace continued. She commanded the medical coordination, evacuation planning, and forward trauma personnel responsible for bringing many of them home. Jack held the armband at his side. Grace looked toward it. That insignia was recovered after Northstar's final deployment. Chief Anderson retained it at Commander Collins's request until the remaining unit property could be released. Jack's voice carried roughness.
She did not request that I keep it. She refused to take it.
Heather looked at him. He had not forgiven the distinction. Grace continued. Her record was restricted to protect operational details, surviving personnel, and foreign medical partners. The restriction did not invalidate her civilian license. It did not create automatic authority in this hospital. It did, however, make ridicule of the missing years profoundly irresponsible. Her gaze settled on Carter. He looked down. Then Grace faced Hayes. He recovered enough to speak. Admiral, her service is distinguished. I will not dispute that. The phrasing sounded careful. Everyone heard the defense forming behind it. But former rank does not authorize a civilian nurse to override a chief surgeon. Grace nodded once. Correct. Hayes had expected resistance. The agreement steadied him. She repeatedly acted outside established command. Her results do not eliminate the risk. Also correct. A murmur moved through the staff. Grace raised one hand, and it ended. Identity validation and conduct review are separate matters, she said. Commander Collins's history proves that your assumptions about her competence were false. It does not prove every decision she made today was procedurally proper. Hayes looked toward Heather with grim satisfaction. Grace had not finished. Your concern about authorization will be examined, so will your repeated refusal to reassess changing evidence, your physical contact with a subordinate, the public humiliation witnessed by patients, and the pattern of complaints previously reduced to questions of tone. Hayes's expression tightened. Special Agent Amber Davis stepped forward, carrying a sealed document case. We have secured the incident logs, internal communications, medication records, security footage, and credential requests, she said. No report will be altered after this point. Carter's eyes shifted toward his office. Amber noticed. Mr. Brooks, your computer access will remain available for patient operations only. Credentialing records are now under preservation order. Carter swallowed. I did not alter anything. Then preservation protects you as well. Lily Cooper had left Ryan's bedside when she heard the titles spoken. She stood near the glass partition, arms crossed over her chest. Dr. Hayes should be removed now, she said. He ignored her until patients were trapped in corridors. Ashley answered before anyone else. A formal review has not occurred. Lily turned toward her. You spent the day helping him discredit her, and that conduct should be reviewed. It does not mean a crowd decides someone's career before evidence is collected. Fiona stepped between the two positions. Dr. Hayes cannot continue supervising this shift, she said. That is a safety decision, not a final punishment. Grace looked to Charlotte. The hospital commander understood the question. Dr. Hayes, Charlotte said, you are relieved of supervisory responsibility, effective immediately. You will transfer active cases to Dr. Blake and remain available only if requested. Hayes stared at her. You are removing the chief trauma surgeon during an emergency because a retired commander arrived with a dog and a piece of fabric. Heather's hand lifted from Ash's head. She faced him. No. The room waited. You are being removed because the team stopped trusting your decisions before anyone knew my name. Hayes looked around. Fiona held his active case list. Ethan stood beside her. Chloe remained at the observation entrance. Daniel had one hand on the status board. No one looked to Hayes for the next instruction. The realization reached him without spectacle. His position had not disappeared when Grace entered.
It had disappeared earlier.
When evidence changed, and he refused to change with it. He removed his identification badge from the lead physician clip and placed it on the desk. "You will discover," he said to Heather, "that admiration is temporary. Procedure remains after the applause." "There is no applause," Heather replied. He looked around again. She was right. No one celebrated. Patients still needed care. Ash still leaned against her injured leg.
The armband
Remained in Jack's hand, heavy with a history the room could not fully understand. Hayes walked toward the administrative corridor under escort from Paul Benson. He stopped beside Grace. "I want my objection entered before any public account is made." "It will be entered," Grace said. "So will every warning you received." He nodded and continued. Ashley watched him leave. For the first time that day, she had no senior figure to follow. Amber Davis began assigning interviews.
Carter requested legal counsel.
Ethan volunteered his field notes before anyone asked. Fiona returned to the active bays. Charlotte looked toward Heather. "You need medical evaluation." Heather glanced at the patients. "The department is stable." "That was not my question." Heather looked at Ash, then at Jack. "I will go." Grace stepped closer. "Before you do, Commander Collins, I need your statement on the conduct review." Heather's expression closed slightly.
Grace recognized the response.
"You will not be asked to disclose protected operations, only today's decisions." "Review all of them." Lily stared at her. "Including yours?" "Yes." "You saved people." "That does not remove review." Ashley looked at Heather with an emotion closer to shame than dislike. Grace asked, "Do you recommend immediate termination for Dr. Hayes?" Several staff members waited for the answer. Heather looked toward the corridor where he had disappeared. "No."
Lily's face tightened.
Heather continued. "Remove him from supervision. Investigate the pattern. Determine whether he ignored evidence because he believed the protocol or because admitting error threatened his position." "And if it was pride?" Grace asked. "Then he should not lead until the institution can trust him to be corrected." "And if he can be corrected?" Heather looked at the fallen lead physician badge on the desk. "Then accountability should make that visible."
Grace studied her.
"You are offering him a path you did not give yourself." Heather's eyes moved toward the armband. "I left before anyone could decide whether I belonged." Jack's voice came from beside Ash. "That was not humility." Heather faced him. "No, it was punishment." She did not deny it. Jack's anger softened without disappearing. "Caleb chose," he said. "You did not force him." "I closed the ramp." "You closed it after he transferred his place." "I gave the order."
And brought 4 people home.
Heather's voice lowered. "Not 5." Ash pressed more firmly against her leg. Jack held out the armband. "You have counted the one we lost for years. You never counted the ones who kept living because you made the decision." Heather did not take the fabric. Grace looked away, giving the exchange what privacy a crowded department could offer. Jack stepped closer. "Caleb did not hand you that armband so you could spend the rest of your life hiding from it."
Heather touched the edge of the cloth.
The Velcro caught against her fingertip. She still did not fasten it to her sleeve. Instead, she folded it once and placed it back into the clear pouch on Ash's harness. "It belongs with the team," she said. Jack looked at the dog. "The team found you." The investigation lasted 6 weeks. Its early findings were released internally within days, because the hospital could not safely postpone operational changes. The security footage confirmed that Hayes had knocked the tray from Heather's hands during the opening confrontation. It also showed Heather correcting Ryan Cooper's equipment placement before his first deterioration. Clinical review found that Heather's warnings were medically reasonable and that her actions remained within ordinary nursing functions until the service door began to close. Her physical movement against Hayes had been defensive and proportionate. No one was injured. The mass-casualty review found that Heather had assumed coordination only after Charlotte Parker placed her under direct command authority. The strongest criticism of Heather concerned what she had not done. She had documented individual hazards, but had not formally escalated the developing pattern of retaliation until the crisis began. Her restricted service record did not require full disclosure, but Grace concluded that Heather could have requested confidential verification before her first shift. Heather accepted the finding. Daniel did not.
They treated her like a fraud before she had a chance to work,
he told Amber Davis. Why should she have expected a private explanation to stay private? Because earlier verification might have prevented confusion, Amber replied. Or it might have given Hayes a different weapon. That is also possible. The final report included both positions. It did not claim that silence was either noble or reckless in every circumstance. It stated that the hospital had failed to provide a secure process through which employees with restricted federal records could verify experience without surrendering protected details. Carter Brooks received a formal reprimand and lost credentialing oversight. Investigators found no altered files, but his delay had prolonged the misunderstanding. He had treated a phone call as optional because sending an email protected him from immediate responsibility. During his interview, he tried to describe the choice as caution. Amber placed the timeline in front of him. You requested clarification after the conflict began, she said. You did not use the direct number until Commander Parker ordered you. Carter read the sequence. I did not think the missing information would affect patient care. You did not investigate whether it could. He accepted reassignment to supply operations rather than contest the finding. Ashley Morgan received a written reprimand for retaliatory scheduling, unprofessional remarks, and spreading unsupported concerns about Heather's resume. She was removed from charge duties for 3 months and required to complete supervisory retraining. Her first apology to Heather was defensive. I should not have repeated speculation, she said, but your answers made it difficult to understand you. Heather looked at her. That is not an apology. Ashley's face reddened. The old instinct to invoke seniority appeared and faded. You are right, she said. I used uncertainty to justify treating you as dishonest. I am sorry. Heather nodded once. Ashley waited for forgiveness. Heather returned to the maintenance report she was reviewing. The absence of immediate comfort forced Ashley to accept that an apology repaired responsibility, not emotion. Weeks later, she made a different choice when a junior nurse reported a problem during a crowded shift. Ashley listened before responding. She documented the concern. Then she thanked the nurse in front of the same staff members who had once watched her silence Chloe. Ethan Walker's review found that his initial objections had been professionally defensible. His later conduct had supported patient safety. He received no discipline. He did, however, request that his evaluation include the moment he focused on Heather's authorization rather than the patient's changed condition. Hayes called that self-protection. Ethan called it accuracy. I was correct that scope matters, he told the review panel. I was wrong to use that principle as a reason not to look again. Fiona recommended him for a patient safety leadership course. He accepted. Chloe Mitchell submitted the dosing concern she had saved from 3 months earlier. Under the new review process, the report was examined for clinical facts before communications style. The original concern was validated.
She was not promoted for being right.
She was asked to join a working group that redesigned the escalation channel. The distinction mattered to her. She did not want courage turned into a ceremonial reward. She wanted the next nurse to know where a warning could go without becoming a trial of personality. Mason Reed became the youngest employee on the emergency readiness team. He learned that questioning authority did not require contempt for it. Before raising concerns, he checked his evidence. When the evidence held, he spoke. Daniel Sullivan helped redesign mass casualty flow for the department. He named no military operation and claimed no borrowed prestige. He placed a simple sentence at the top of every training sheet. A plan protects people only while it still matches the room. Ryan Cooper recovered and returned to outpatient rehabilitation. Lily continued to believe Hayes should have been dismissed permanently. She attended the public portion of the review and said so without apology. He did not make one mistake, she argued. He was warned repeatedly and punished the people who warned him. Fiona offered the opposing position.
Removal from authority was necessary.
Permanent dismissal should depend on whether the pattern can be corrected and whether he accepts responsibility. Lily looked toward Heather. You still think he deserves another chance? Heather answered carefully. I think patients deserve proof that he changed before he receives authority again. That was not forgiveness. It was a standard. The review found that Hayes had a documented pattern of reframing valid concerns as failures of tone, loyalty, or chain of command. It also found that he remained an exceptionally skilled trauma surgeon whose direct clinical work had saved many patients. His punishment divided the hospital. Some employees wanted termination. Others argued that removing a physician with his ability would reduce trauma capacity and avoid the harder work of reforming leadership culture. Grace Bennett approved a consequence that satisfied neither side completely. Hayes was suspended for 3 months. He lost department leadership indefinitely. Any return would be as a staff surgeon under direct supervision, with mandatory retraining, monitored decision review, and no role in employee discipline for at least 1 year. He could accept the conditions or resign. For 10 days, he refused to answer. On the 11th, he requested a meeting with Heather. She agreed only after Grace confirmed that the conversation would be documented. Hayes entered the conference room without the chief surgeon badge he had worn for 7 years. He placed a folder on the table. I reviewed the footage, he said. Heather waited. You saw Ryan Cooper's change before I did? Yes. You were still outside assignment? Yes. The answer irritated him. He had expected her to use the admission as surrender. You agree with me now? I agreed the procedure mattered before you said it. Then why did you make me the villain for defending it? I did not make you anything. His hand tightened around the folder. The entire hospital watched an admiral address you by rank. After the crisis, they decided what I was before the investigation began. Heather looked at him. That is what you did to me. The sentence left him with no immediate reply. He opened the folder. Inside were copies of the earlier complaints reviewed under his leadership. Each contained a concern reduced to 1 sentence, followed by pages analyzing the employee's manner. I thought control prevented error, he said. It can. I thought disagreement during emergencies weakened teams. It can. His eyes narrowed. You keep agreeing with the principals. The principals were not the problem. He looked down at the reports. I was.
Heather did not rescue him from the statement.
After several seconds, he asked, "Do you believe I can return?" "That is not my decision." I asked what you believe. She considered him. "If your first goal is getting your title back, no. And if it is not, then prove that before asking anyone to trust you." Hayes closed the folder. He accepted the conditions the next morning. Some staff considered the decision too lenient. Lily called it institutional protection.
Others believed permanent dismissal
Would have allowed the hospital to blame one arrogant doctor while ignoring the systems that had rewarded him. The disagreement remained. What changed was that Hayes no longer controlled the terms of it. 3 months later, he returned as a staff surgeon. On his second shift, Chloe questioned an order involving a veteran whose condition had changed since assessment. The central station became still. Everyone knew the history.
Hayes looked at the chart,
Then at Chloe. "Show me." She did. He changed the order. No one applauded. That absence mattered. Improvement was not a performance. It was a repeated decision made when pride had another option. The hospital created a restricted credential verification channel connected directly to federal personnel offices. Emergency department staff received authority to trigger rapid multidisciplinary review when patient evidence conflicted with a senior order. The policy did not allow employees to ignore command whenever they disagreed. It required a second qualified assessment without retaliation. Grace Bennett rejected the first proposed name for the policy.
administrators wanted to call it
The Collins Protocol. Heather refused. The final document became the Evidence Escalation Standard. "It should work when no famous name is attached," she said. The hospital also established a military working dog support partnership for veterans and handlers receiving care on base. Ash became its first ceremonial member after his retirement. Logan Carter adopted him. The dog traded his working harness for a plain collar at home, though Logan kept the old gear in a cabinet beside the retirement certificate. On clinic days, Ash wore a blue support vest with no rank, unit, or operational markings. The clear pouch remained attached inside the retired harness. Heather visited him during the first training session. Ash recognized her vehicle before she opened the door. He waited at Logan's side until released, then crossed the parking area and sat against her left knee. The joint had been repaired again after the mass-casualty shift. Fiona had been correct that it required treatment. Heather lowered a hand to Ash's neck. "You are slower," Logan said. "So is he." Ash looked between them as if both statements were irrelevant. Jack Anderson attended the visit. He carried the torn photograph Heather had once kept in her jacket. The missing half had been restored. Jack had found the original copy in Caleb Price's effects, released by the family after the final unit review. The complete image showed Caleb standing beside Heather, one hand resting on Ash's harness. On the back, Caleb had written a second line beneath Northstar. "Bring them home. Then, let them bring you back." Heather read it twice. Jack did not ask whether she was ready to forgive herself. He had learned that forgiveness asked too much at once. "Grace wants you to teach," he said. "She has asked before. This time, the course is civilian." Heather looked toward the training building. "Emergency leadership? Medical teams, first responders, hospital supervisors. No command title required?" She folded the photograph carefully. "Who chose the instructors?" "Grace, Fiona, Charlotte." "And you?" I complained until they added my name. Heather almost smiled. Jack saw it. You should do that more often. I have heard. She accepted a part-time position teaching crisis coordination and ethical escalation. She did not return to active duty. She did not reclaim command. Her first class included physicians, nurses, administrators, emergency technicians, and military corpsmen. Hayes attended from the back row as part of his supervisory retraining. Heather began without introducing her service record. She placed a photograph of a crowded emergency department on the screen and asked each person to identify the first failure. The physicians chose equipment. The administrators chose staffing. The nurses chose communication. Hayes raised his hand. Assumption, he said. Heather looked at him. He continued. Everyone assumes the person above them has already seen what they have seen. She nodded. Then what? Verify. Escalate. Change the plan if the evidence changes.
The class moved on.
Afterward, Hayes remained behind. Was that the correct answer? It was a useful one. He gave a brief, tired smile. You still refuse easy approval. It makes people dependent. He accepted the point and left. 6 months after the storm, the emergency department completed its first full-scale mass casualty exercise under the new standard. Mason locked the gurney wheels before anyone reminded him. Chloe challenged an incomplete order and received a second review without retaliation. Ashley redirected a staff member without humiliating him. Ethan changed the intake route when the simulated evidence no longer matched the written plan. Fiona watched from the observation area. Charlotte stood beside the central desk. Heather remained near the doors, with Ash seated at her left side. Logan held the loose end of the dog's lead, but allowed it to rest against the floor. The old command armband lay inside a glass display near the training entrance. Heather had resisted the display until Caleb's family approved it. The plaque beneath the fabric did not list victories or classified missions. It carried 3 lines. Authority requires evidence. Judgment requires responsibility. Service requires accountability. At the end of the exercise, a young nurse noticed that a simulated patient had been routed to the wrong zone. She hesitated when she saw Hayes standing nearby. He noticed the hesitation. "What do you see?" he asked. She explained. He checked the chart and redirected the patient. Heather watched from across the room. Hayes did not look toward her for approval. The young nurse did not look afraid. That was enough. After the staff left, Heather opened the display case. She removed the armband and held it across both palms. Ash rose beside her. Logan waited near the door. "You taking it home?" he asked. Heather looked at the silver oak leaf, the faded Northstar emblem, and the name she had spent years trying not to hear spoken with authority. "No." She refolded the fabric and returned it to the case. Then she placed Caleb's restored photograph beside it. Ash settled against her leg. Heather closed the glass door. "Service does not seek recognition," she said, "but silence cannot protect everyone." Heather's hidden past proved that the hospital had underestimated her, yet her own silence allowed that misunderstanding to deepen until patients were at risk. Was remaining quiet an act of dignity, or did she have a responsibility to reveal enough of the truth sooner? Heather's story reminds us that authority can organize a room, but it cannot replace humility, attention, or the courage to reconsider a decision. She proved that real leadership is not announced through titles, medals, or public recognition. It appears in the moment someone accepts responsibility, while others are still protecting their pride. Yet her silence also carries a warning. Dignity should never be confused with disappearing, and endurance is not always the same as wisdom.
By refusing to explain herself,
Heather protected her privacy, but she also allowed false assumptions to grow until patients were placed at greater risk. Dr. Hayes's failure was not that he respected procedure. Standards, credentials, and clear command structures are essential in medicine. His failure was using those standards as a shield against evidence and treating correction as humiliation. The lesson is not that rules should be ignored whenever a confident person speaks. It is that rules must remain connected to their purpose, protecting human life. Accountability is equally important. Heather did not demand revenge after the truth emerged, because justice built on anger can repeat the same abuse of power it claims to oppose. She chose investigation, reform, and a path that required every person, including herself, to answer for their choices. That is the deeper meaning of service. Not being beyond correction, but being willing to act, listen, and change when others depend on you. Share this story with someone who believes leadership means always being right. And tell us, was Heather's silence a sign of strength, or should she have revealed the truth sooner?